Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. On this show, Clark is back, on the back of our recent Conan episode, to talk about some of the numerous Conan pastiches that started to hit bookstore shelves in the 1960s. One thing we probably didn't talk about too much when Dave dropped by to talk about Conan was just how massive the rip-off industry became in the 60s after the Frazetta-covered Conan reprints started flying off bookshelves, inspiring a bajillion lookalikes and imposters, and providing a number of writers with a pretty healthy income. After all, Robert E. Howard wasn't about to keep on writing his tales, and hadn't been for 30-odd years. Clark Ashton Smith had just about got to the 60s before he passed over, but his last 20 years were devoted to painting and sculpture, and his specific brand of theosophical and baroque fantasy was still very much rooted in its 1930s weird tales origins, although it would find new audiences in the 60s, much like Howard, although to a lesser degree. Others had been keeping the sword and sorcery flame lit, of course, like Fritz Leiber and Poul Anderson, whilst Moorcock was making hay with his early Elric stories, subverting some of those old Howardian tropes and bringing in broad strokes of Peake and Anderson, and sprinkling in his own unique vision of the sword and sorcery genre, or, as it became known as the 60s and 70s progressed, heroic fantasy. A whole host of other authors were sticking very much to the basics, or, in some cases, just seeing the dollar signs. We could probably get into a whole podcast episode debating the origins and meanings of sword and sorcery as a tag, or epic, or heroic fantasy, and I think we did touch on it with Oliver Brackenbury when we looked at New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine. But for today's going round, we're just talking Conan knockoffs, and we could have had a really scientific take on what to select as our reading, but we just agreed that we had a couple of things to hand, so let's talk about them. One was easy, it's called Brak the Barbarian, and it wears his influences boldly on its sleeve. The other one is one of the tales of Thongor the Barbarian, and if you think that sounds like a silly name, you ain't seen, or rather heard, nothing yet. And we crowbar some other bits in too, because why not? We also talk about and relate things back to gaming a wee bit, but it's Clarky, so obviously we would. But sit back upon your hard-won throne, or your hill pony, whichever suits, and think back to your early days in the northern crags. Remember the wisdom of your forebears, how they told you that, far above the northern steppes, the scarlet gnu sheds its horns with every new moon. It has been known that the three-eared troglodytes of the youngest tribes gather them to make ear trumpets, because they believe that only 3 years' worth of sound is simply not adequate, and they tell you that we may choose our own fights. We may lose a liver, or an eye, or our dignity, or our member, or even our life, but it's our choice. There we go, fooled like the wuzzo bird by the hollow civilized concept of friendship, plummeting like the crag-starling chick to the shale below, brain cracked open and bog bugs feasting on the goo inside. But ultimately, they said, and this always stuck true, the pips of the plume fall as they will, and if they fall in snow, then fear no omens. Clarky the Cruel has returned to Derry and Toms because we came up with an idea a while ago of something that we want to talk to. But you know what, we'll get to that in a second. What's going on in your world, Mr. Clark?
I've just come back from Bulgaria, which was a culture shock because despite the fact we were going on an all-inclusive pool and water park holiday in Bulgaria, I grew up in the 80s, so my idea of Bulgaria is fur hats and poison umbrellas. But it's fucking hot, Andy. It's fucking hot.
Yeah.
Nobody told us.
Yeah, it's a treasured holiday destination now, isn't it?
It's like 36 degrees. But it was very pleasant. But yeah, so I've just come back from Bulgaria and getting back into the swing of the joys of work. And game-wise, I'm playing in an expertly run Western wagon train game that Andy Horston's running for us on a Monday night.
Interesting.
Which is very layered and interesting because there's not that much actual violence in it. A lot of it's kind of negotiation and stuff to do with the terrain and stuff. And we've designed the whole wagon train, and that's good fun.
Yeah, I mean, you've actually got a thing for a small penchant for Western RPGs, haven't you? Because I remember you extolling the virtues of Boot Hill at one point.
Yes. Yeah, I like Ballots and Bullets, which is a campaign that comes out for that where you... the basic setting for a campaign is that there's an election and it's I've run it for Black Hack with a fantasy skin, but it's how you manipulate that election or participate in it, whether you just act as desperados or try and carve your own path. I think it's a great little self-contained campaign sandbox.
Yeah, well, that's kind of your MO, isn't it? The whole sandbox approach, and give the players the opportunity to actually decide how they want their group narrative to proceed, which is why whenever you ran it for the group I gamed with, it usually revolved around starting a petting zoo or putting on really fantastic variety shows.
Kidnapping Elvis from another dimension. Yeah.
yeah, that kind of thing, which is all very much up my street. But we're here on this occasion, and it's interesting this because, of course, we only talked about Conan by the time this goes out, it will be a couple of episodes ago. Of course, Dave came on and we talked about Conan, the original archetypal sword and sorcery barbarian character. But we decided a while back, when we did a one-shit book for Christmas, which was Snow Castles, which was sort of a barbarian, but not really a barbarian. We had something of a conversation then, because he was from the north, yes. He wore a fairy girdle, yes. He had a large axe-type weapon, fine. But he was some kind of weird noble.
But he had a magic sword, didn't he? He had a magic sword.
He did have a magic sword, yeah.
He had
the cover where he had a bizarre-looking weapon.
He had an axe-like weapon on the cover. Yeah.
That's right. I'm getting mixed up with the cover. So it all kicked off with Conan. Then, of course, all this barbarian thing exploded in the 60s after the Conan novels were published with the Frank Frazetta covers, and they all flew off the shelves, and everybody got a hard-on for the whole barbarian sword and sorcery angle. And it kicked off all these pastiches and rip-offs. But before we get on to a couple of the things that we actually decided to do some homework on, because unusually, we're not going to just take a book and then mercilessly spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it by going through it with a fine-tooth comb. We're actually going to talk about a few different pastiche takes on the whole Conan-style barbarian angle. But what is the appeal of the barbarian sword and sorcery fantasy book?
Well, my take on this, and it's a very personal take, is my dad loved Louis L'Amour westerns. And he devoured them. He loved westerns on the telly as well. That would be a bit of a ritual when BBC Two had its 6 o'clock western on. That was you're quiet, your dad's watching his Cowie. But I think it's very much that same strong, rugged individual perception transferred to a never when, whether it's the far future in some of the cases we'll be discussing, or the far past, or another planet, or another dimension, or whatever. It's that same rugged individual guy who rides into town, and whether he's righting wrongs or just carving his own destiny, I think it's that rugged individualism that's the appeal, and the wish fulfillment, obviously, and the power fantasy.
Yeah.
In cutting the fat merchant down to size and bedding 1 or 2 serving maids or dancing girls or whatever, isn't it?
There is something primal and appealing about that character, isn't there? I mean, we sit here, 2 civil servants, and I'm sure we could both imagine situations where either of us have been sitting around a table and somebody who is educated and fairly posh starts talking about governance and useful conversations, and your eyes start to roll into the back of your head and you start to glaze over, and one of them gets on your nerves, and just for a split second that little part of your id thinks, I'd love to be able to deal with this person by burying my flint axe in their forehead and moving
which would
on.
not be in line with departmental values, obviously. We would never
I think it's a breach. I think it's a breach of the civil service code.
It might well be. Well be. But I'm sure everyone's had their odd moment where they've had to restrain their inner barbarian and wherever they were.
Yeah,
but it's that wish fulfillment, that little bit of muscle flexing, isn't it? Where fantasy elements of it. which will make it a very masculine genre, which is interesting because I don't do women read these books? You woman, do you read them? Presume some women do.
Some women do, because I think I've commented before that when it came to the books that we got off Pops, our Jane, my sister, she would get all the westerns. I would get all the fantasy and sci-fi, with the exception of Conan, where we would have to share them because she was massively into the Conan story.
But that's that western overlap again, isn't it? And Robert E. Howard wrote westerns.
So there's something of the frontier adventure in your westerns. If your rapscallion rogue protagonist goes into town, by and large, the people who are up to no good in the town aren't rapscallions. They're the ones with the money.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who are running the local rackets. They're the ones who are running the gold mines. So it's a similar kind of thing. Your barbarian character tends to come into conflict with civilization.
And if you move your westerns later, like the spaghetti westerns, if you move them into the 20th century, they tend to move the action to Mexico because that's where things are faster and looser. And it's still got that frontier dynamic, hasn't it, because of the Civil War, you know.
So how do we define a barbarian character in this sense? Because, we know about sword and sorcery and all this business, and we know that there's a difference between high fantasy and low fantasy, and sometimes these things perhaps trip over each other from time to time in some forms of fantasy fiction. But when we're talking about the kind of books that we're talking about, the Conan pastiches, the ones, some of them will actually trip over into not just Conan pastiche, but John Carter pastiche.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
One of the ones we're going to talk about is more Barsoomian than Hyborian in terms of its influences, and it wears them quite clearly on its sleeve. But, how are we going to compartmentalize what we refer to in our Barbarian Bingo episode as the stories of the rugged northern barbarian brushing up against civilization and being a thief?
I'm not sure they always have to be northern, although I think in the texts we're looking at, they all are.
Yeah.
But I don't think they have to be. I've only read a couple of Charles L. Sanders short stories, but they're obviously set in a kind of fantasy Africa, aren't they? And have a kind of a Conan substitute in some of them. So I don't think they necessarily have to be northern. I don't have my copy of Unearthed Arcana with me to look at what the prerequisites are for a barbarian.
Let's not go down that road. Yeah, no. We'll everybody will be accusing us of min-maxing.
Fur nappies.
Yeah.
Muscles.
Yep.
Surprisingly, and I think actually with nearly all of these not being inarticulate, which if we come on to the Conan exploitation movies is often where they go wrong, but they're not necessarily inarticulate. In Conan's case, they're not even uneducated, depending where you are in his career. But I think it's just that image, isn't it, of, and whether that muscle is to sort of the Arnie's sort of state of bodybuilder grotesque, or is something more practical and realistic, is a matter of degree. Muscles, manes, and nappies.
Yeah, by and large, they're men who perhaps are educated in that they're men of the world, but generally come from, primitive parts of the world and move into parts of the world where there are a combination of, for that world at least, modern civilization creating conflict with the older world, and sometimes built upon the ruins of an even vastly more ancient world. And into this world our hero moves, and he generally deals with everything that he comes across with a very, very simple code of honor. Very Western, as you pointed out, very, man with no name. You could take any one of the Clint Eastwood or any whole number of spaghetti westerns, convert them to sword and sandal, and practically change nothing. In fact, that's what people like Antonio Margheriti and a lot of the other Italian directors did with those films, isn't it? You mentioned earlier on that you were watching your Hunter from the Future.
Yes.
It wouldn't take many changes to turn that into a spaghetti western. Obviously,
in fact,
I think without the Triceratops.
I think if they'd lent more into the spaghetti western tropes, it would be a stronger film.
Yeah.
I think that's where it lets itself down a little bit. It gets a bit too distracted by the fantasy tropes. A few close-ups on people's eyes and stuff, and it would have been a stronger film.
Yeah.
But
interestingly, you mentioned that you were watching Yor earlier, and it's not that long ago that I know you got this as well. We both got our Barbarians from Conan to He-Man books that we backed on Kickstarter. Did you get your Yor badge?
I have got a Yor badge. I've added it to my battle. Yeah, I've added it to my battle jacket. Yes, I also got a Barbarian Queen badge, but I'm somewhat ambiguous given that the write-up in there confirms just how rapey Barbarian Queen is.
Oh yeah, it's not pleasant, is it?
No.
So I've got Yor, the Beastmaster, Conan the Destroyer, Barbarian Queen.
Yeah,
Red
they're the ones.
And the Barbarians, starring the Barbarian brothers. Yeah, very cute. Never did I ever think for a second that I would have a Yor pin badge. So nice move.
No, and that's a great little toe. But yeah, I think basically a main, possibly a fairy nappy, although they will be given to more practical clothing in many cases. Although inevitably, much like Jane in The Mirror ended up in her underwear, they will find themselves in their fair nappy at some point in the story.
Yeah,
that's the. If you were going to draw one, although I seem to remember when we were last playing D&D together, the party barbarian didn't even have a fair nappy; just had a very long. He was a dwarf and had a very long beard that covered their unmentionables.
Fair enough. Well, the last barbarian I played ended up running a cereal cafe. So,
yes, indeed, he did.
If you recall, so,
I do recall. But, yes,
yes,
and he was from the north. Yes,
he was. He was very much from the north.
Yeah.
Now, we've had some very brief exchanges previously about how you would go about doing a game that was entirely consistent of nothing but barbarians and how you would possibly manage that. Funnily enough, I'm going to be doing a first game sometime in November for the first time in quite a while. And I have been thinking about what to do. And I'd come up with an idea that was probably much more likely to entertain me than entertain the players, which was to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons, but probably using an older rule system, but just have everybody be a bard. But everybody in the world is a bard, including the monsters. And that's as far as I'd got with my plan. But it's a starting point, I think.
Yes.
But we had an idea which was very, very similar about a barbarian game where everyone is a barbarian.
Yeah.
And I was having to think about how you could manage some of the mechanics of that. So I was going to leave this to the end, but we're talking gaming, so let's do it now. Everyone's from the north, but I thought one of the mechanics that you could introduce, and this would work in something like Black Hack, is that everyone's from the north, but they argue about how north they are.
Well, yeah.
So one might be from, so for example, one might be from the equivalent of that world's Sheffield. So the others are like, your trad is about as north as my sandal straps.
Yeah, it's like Geordie's claim Liverpool's in the Midlands. Yes.
Yeah. So you could have some kind of conflict mechanic needed for when these disagreements come into play, and maybe even use it as a replacement for initiative. So I was thinking, instead of rolling initiative for a fight, for example, you could use the mechanic in loads of different ways as well. It actually becomes another layer of conflict that has direct consequences for the barbarian's abilities in a fight. But you can have like a burnable resource like usage dice, so in what's a usage dice in Black Hack? It's like you don't track how many arrows you've got.
No,
but you have a
roll
usage dice.
A dice, and if you roll 1 or 2, you go down to the next biggest dice after an encounter.
Yeah, so you've got a finite supply, but it's the dice roll that kind of dictates how quickly you run out. Well, what if your usage die for this was north points or northerner points? So once a fight starts and everybody's elbowing each other out the way to try and be the most hardcore barbarian, they all have to have an argument about who's the most barbarian, who's the northest. And then you have a usage die for north and for the northage, and that reduces in correlation with how many useful civilized skills the barbarian may have to gain through play, so that they actually manage to learn something essential to party survival or progress. So if actually you need to learn how to, I don't know, do something that would be considered a civilized skill, it might have an effect on your usage dice, and it gives everybody else the opportunity to go, ha 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 ha, you and your stupid civilized ways. Yeah.
Yes. You're using
It's
a
an
panini
undeveloped
maker.
idea.
You are practically
Yeah.
southern.
That's right, yeah.
Another way of doing that is, have you read White Hack?
I got the orange one ages ago, and I think I lost the will to live about 5 pages in.
It is. Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but it does have, and an easier way to come to it might be Makicho Monsters, which is like a blend of it and Black Hack, but that has a blind bid mechanic, so it's designed for chasers and stuff. So you basically add on something to the roll you're going to make, but it enables you to make the roll first.
Right.
So no, I'm more northern than you because I saw the Kwatang bird at first light fall off the cliffs of Guazala. Oh, no, I'm more northern than you because I, have torn out the throat of a mammoth with my bare teeth. And that could be as they're increasing their bids to make that initiative roll. But risking their chances of making the initiative roll. Just an idea.
I may pursue this, but then again I may not, because for my team of players, if I tell them this is what we're doing and this is how it's going to work, they'll all look at me blankly and probably say, let's just get drunk or go out instead. So probably wouldn't work out. Not everybody shares my tastes when it comes to barbarians in fantasy role-playing games and how you can play around with them.
So shall we turn to the texts, or shall we say what text we looked at?
Well, let's kick off with Thongor. So, Thongor. One of the books that we decided to look at was, and actually this ended up being I think this is the 3rd Thongor book, so he's already a king in this.
But it was 2, wasn't it?
Well, I only read 1. Thongor against the gods.
I read that and City of Magicians, but I read them in the wrong order, which I think is 15-year-old me getting books out the library would approve.
Now, Thongor was the creation of Lynn Carter, a.k.a. Linwood Vrooman Carter, which I think is quite a groovy name. Yeah. And he's probably best known to a couple of generations of Conan fans or more, thanks to his work alongside Elsbrag de Camp on regenerating and rejigging the Conan stories in the 60s. He collaborated on new Conan stories with Spragg de Camp, Beyond the Core Tales, and other non-Conan stories by him so they could rewrite them to fit the Hyborian age. And he also completed a number of Cull stories that Howard never completed. And on top of that, Clark Ashton Smith tales that he assembled from fragments and then embellished. So
I didn't know that.
To that as well. Yeah. He wrote shitloads of his own fantasy, not just Thongor, but he wrote Sword and Planet or planetary romance stories of Jandar of Callisto. Got a few of them on the shelf. And I did think at the time, they'll be John Carter knockoffs. But actually, having read this Thongor book, this is more Barsoom than Hyboria.
It's incredibly Barsoomian, I think. Yeah.
So while he was doing that, he was also writing Hollow Earth Adventures,
which again is
of Eric Carstairs in the land of Xanthodon.
Yeah, but Hollow Earth is incredibly Eric Rice Burroughs as well, isn't it?
Yeah, Pellucidar. So Lynn Carter is basically just pastiching everything by Robert E. Howard, and not only Robert E. Howard and Edgar Rice Burroughs, but he also wrote a series about Zarkon, Lord of the Unknown, a sort of cross between Doc Savage and a superhero, but from the future, who comes to our time to fight weird science criminals. So he was really knocking this shit out. And, all of these ones he's writing at least half a dozen. He's super prolific in the 60s and 70s. He's also an editor and is an anthologist. He's probably got 4 or 5 dozen books to his name, and he died at just 57. So had he not died at 57, he probably would have had hundreds of these bloody things kicking around.
But you're missing the most important thing. which is on my cover of Thongor Against the Gods, there's a bare-breasted Gale Platt and a
Ah.
bare-chested, sword-wielding Rodney from Only Fools and Horses on the cover.
Ah, well, my cover is I've got a Warner Books version of that, and it's a slightly more moody illustration in which is you've got a bronzed, muscly guy with a sword and a shield and a pointy helmet, who looks to be standing over the wreckage of what at first looks like it could be armor or ribs, but actually on closer examination almost has a slightly robotic look to it, and it's on fire. So
that's quite appropriate for kind of the non-Euclidean ritual gone wrong, if I remember Against the Gods correctly. Finale.
Well, yeah. This Lemuria world of Lynn Carter's, it's very much more in the... Okay, it's got Thongor, who originally is a barbarian from the north, undertaking adventures in decadent and shady cities in this version of the sword and sorcery world. But of course, Lemuria, in the Hyboria history, before Hyboria there was Atlantis, and before Atlantis there was Lemuria.
Yeah.
So he's still name-checking it for one of the ancient continents of Earth that Howard had as one of the precursors of Hyboria. But it's got a lot more in common with Barsoom for a number of reasons, even though the barbarians are from the north, because you've not got the analogues of real-world places, which you do get to an extent in the Brak stories, and we'll look at Brak a little bit later. But the names are sillier.
Yes.
I think, yes, the civilization of Lemuria is kind of built on the bones of more ancient people, but the ancient inhabitants also left behind ancient technologies. So you've got an element of weird science in there too.
I thought it was
silver airboats
with the evil sorcerers, because they're all kind of twisted midget. There's one that's like Master Blaster, isn't it? It's like an evil small person on a big body, if I remember correctly. It's ages ago since I've read these.
And there's people riding lizards and other novel animals.
And there's giant blue plain barbarians.
Yeah.
Who in no way are green Martians.
Well, he does not hide for a second any of his influences in this.
No.
There's a character called Xandar Zan, which is awfully close to Kantar Khan from the John Carter stories. There's a character called Karm Karvus, as opposed to Tars Tarkus.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's really not hiding it. And whilst Thongor himself is a sort of thinly veiled Conan knockoff, he's a lot less introspective as a king than the Cimmerian. I mean, Thongor did have his fans, though, and there was almost a Thongor movie in the 70s.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading... Was that in Black Ace or something?
I can't remember where I came across it, but it was another almost from Milton Subotsky, post-Amicus. So at the time, Subotsky is up to his ears in almosts with Doctor Who movies. We almost got a Doctor Who movie. We also got a Guy in Smith's Crab movie. Then we almost got a Doctor Who King Crab mashup movie, which came very, very close to happening because the King Crab script ended up getting retasked as a possible Doctor Who script. And when I was talking to Tara, Guy's daughter, when we had her on last Halloween, that had recently been discovered. So that script is actually floating around now, and I think Tara has had access to it. And now, almost Thongor. And it's a real shame because even though I will put myself out there and say I'm not the biggest fan of these Thongor stories in any way, shape or form, I think Milton Subotsky should have got all the money to make all of these projects. It would have been amazing.
The Thongor ones, they are, like you say, they're extremely derivative. What I did like, and it's a little Saturday morning serial, but I did like kind of the cabal of wicked wizards in it. The sort of Council of 9, or they go down to the Council of 7 after a couple of them have been inadvertently blown up in a failed ritual. And that kind of Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, ritual gone wrong, whoops, we've lost a couple of them, we will have our revenge, sort of element to it. I quite liked that. I quite liked that as a theme, and I quite liked how they were all quite well sketched. I wouldn't say well developed, but well sketched as villains. I think I lost count of the number of times Thongor would fall off something or fall down something, and miraculously grab hold of something or have his fall broken.
They are extraordinarily repetitive in a number of ways.
But that again is very like Edgar Rice Burroughs, right?
Well, I think Edgar Rice Burroughs had a little bit more style, and whilst a lot of the stuff that Rice Burroughs put in the Barsoom novels now seems really staid and like just modern tropes of that kind of fantasy.
He was doing it first. Yeah.
He was doing it first, and it was all quite fresh. Yes, it became repetitive because they were so popular that he just carried on writing them. But I think the first probably 4 or 5 John Carter books, I think, rattle along at a pace. I think the prose is really good. And whilst I think the worst thing about these Thongor books is they take some of the trappings and flavour of the Barsoom stuff and rinse the shit out of it to the point where it becomes almost unbearably dull.
Bit like the movie.
Well, I love the movie.
Oh, do you?
I am an absolutely unashamed fan of the movie because it was so faithful to the source material.
I found it just a bit bingy bong, ingly bong.
Well, I loved it. I did have a couple of problems with it, but on the whole, I thought it was amazing. And when I sat and watched it in the cinema, I was just thinking, I wish Pops was alive to watch it because, he introduced all this to me, and I think he probably would have really, really enjoyed it. And Pops was a tough audience. I remember after my nana died, I took him to see Independence Day, and he thought it was absolute garbage. And it was the first time I'd been to cinema since The Exorcist. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, we have been to cinema since he saw The Exorcist, and now he's watching this massive multi-million-dollar alien invasion movie with all the spectacular special effects. He was deeply unimpressed. Yeah. Right. But, maybe if we'd have got the Thongor movie, maybe he would have liked that a little bit more. So,
I don't know. Who would you cast as Thongor then?
Well, I'd somebody unknown, mostly.
Not Doug McClure.
No, Doug McClure would never carry off a barbarian character. Doug McClure could be in one of these, but I don't think he could ever carry off a barbarian. That said, having never seen him in a loincloth, maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger set an unrealistic expectations for what a barbarian should look like. Maybe a barrel-chested guy with hair on his chest should be the right barbarian. I don't know.
I think he gets fairly close to that in People That Time Forgot, doesn't he?
He's
never quite dishevelled in that.
Yeah, he's dishevelled, but he's not wearing a fair nappy and showing off his thews, his mighty thews. Yeah. But no, not for me. I think he works perfectly as the, rough and rugged Victorian adventurer type. I'm not sure I have him pegged as the guy from the wilderness. Yeah. I think it's a shame that we never got that.
Charles Bronson's always a good choice, but he would have been getting on a bit.
He would have been. But to be honest, tell me that if you told me there was a canon Charles Bronson Thongor movie made in 1984, yeah.
Well, it would have been better than more Death Wish.
Directed by Sam Furstenberg or something. Yeah, I'd be all over that like
You'd swap a Death Wish for that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. It would be absolute fucking garbage, but it'd be glorious garbage. Glorious
Hey,
garbage.
Pally.
Yeah. Apparently, Subotsky tried to get Schwarzenegger to star as Thongor, so the rumour goes, but he'd already signed on to play Conan. But, I think that might actually be an apocryphal story.
I think that's a little bit of a convention circuit fabrication, or
very possibly, it was when Schwarzenegger had only done Hercules, and that comedy western where he played a character called Handsome Stranger, the name of which I can never remember.
Lou Ferrigno.
Lou Ferrigno. I don't know that. I haven't seen the Canon Hercules. You see, I just made the big case.
Have you seen the Canon Hercules? Because
the Canon Hercules films are barely even fucking watchable. They're so bad. And I like a bad Canon movie, but holy fuck, they are bad films. And not bad for good reasons. They're not good bad. They're not bad good. They're just bad.
That's just bad.
Just bad, across the board. So anyway, Thongor against the gods. So I've got to point out at this point that this isn't the first Thongor story, but I started
I think that's where we went wrong, because I think if we'd gone for the earlier Thongor stories, we might have got more of a barbarian feel from Thongor. Because these are very much Thongor the king, aren't they?
Yeah, he's already the king.
Or Quark, or whatever they're called. They're not called a king, are they? They're called something else.
So this is the third in his series of 7 written in the 60s, although Robert M. Price wrote many more, apparently. We have to take it as read.
Sarks. They're called Sarks.
Yeah. He's right off the bat, this is much more heightened and cartoonish in its approach to world building, the players, the stakes. It's good fun at first, I would say. The dialogue is creakily archaic. And having just read Conan for the first time in donkey's years, I was impressed by not only how much dialogue there was in that compared to what I remember, but how direct the character exchanges are and how well they work. But I suppose this works in the context of what Carter's building. You can actually imagine a florid and performative GM really, really going to town on this stuff if you were running a Lemuria
Hamming
game.
it up. Yes.
Oh, yeah, because just have a listen to some of this, dear listeners. Oh, I'll put my glasses on. I've got to put my reading glasses on for a second. Yeah, it is. Not so much serious as my eyes are getting shit. So it goes. Thongor of Valkarth swung his mighty Northlander broadsword with the full strength of his giant thews behind each stroke. His lips were drawn back, baring his teeth in a tigerish grin, and the red joy of battle flamed in his strange golden eyes. Steel met steel, ringing with war's grim music. Sparks flew as his opponent's blade shattered before the irresistible force of Thongor's blow. The man was half driven to his knees and raised his charm. What's a charm? Is it some kind of buckler or something?
I'm guessing it's a sort of shield.
Yeah, to catch the return blow of the terrible longsword. Oh, the charm, as the Lemurian shield was called, was a small circular buckler. You see, I don't entirely forget these things when I read them a month ago. Yeah. Obviously, that stuck. Tough, varnished dragonhide leather stretched over a light frame of aldwood comprised the shield, and one used it to adroitly catch and turn the glancing stroke of a sword, rather than to sustain the full force of a descending blade edge. The huge muscles of Thongor's naked shoulders writhed and knotted with the power of his return stroke. Its impact knocked the kneeling swordsman flying and left his charm a tangle of smashed wood and torn leather. Thongor planted his booted feet firmly and laughed as a comrade helped the fallen swordsman stagger to his feet. "Well done, Chan Kojun. We shall make a dragon of you yet," he boomed, clapping the younger man on the shoulder. Chan Kojun grinned, wincing. "Aye, sire, if I manage to survive the training unslain." Thongor laughed. "Ha ha 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 ha!" Sheathing his broadsword, he accepted a great crimson cloak from a warrior and threw it about his brawny shoulders, drawing one end of the cloak under his arm and across his chest, and fastening the garment to his shoulder strap of his harness with a cairngorm brooch. Cairngorm, eh?
Now that feels Scottish. A little bit Black Shield of Farmworth, doesn't it? Feels a bit kind of cod medievalism. And I'm not much given to homoeroticism.
Oh, well, you've come to the wrong place because it's absolutely fucking packed with it, isn't it?
But what homoeroticism I may be drawn to may not be huge rippling shoulders, but there's definitely a bit of that there, isn't there?
Well, it's not finished yet either, because we've already had repeated references to his brawn, his muscles, his thews, and it continues. It says, "The mighty Valkarthan was an imposing figure, a bronzed giant of a man, thewed like a titan, broad-shouldered, deep-chested, narrow of waist, and long of leg. His superb body was naked save for a black leather harness, girdle, scarlet loincloth, and black buskins, or calf-high boots. Yeah. His dark unruly mane of coarse straight hair was tossed back over his shoulders, held out of his eyes by a strap of leather across the brows." Yeah, so Lynn is really, really laying it on thick that this guy is basically, I don't know, is like...
Beefcake!
Beefcake! Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I did work with a guy who was married and incredibly neat and prestigious, little dicky bow, everything, but absolutely built like a brick house, worked house. And he had all these weightlifting magazines. And one time it was quiet in work, so I could look at your magazine. And when you lifted them open, there was like a sense of spread of a bodybuilder, like in a bubble bath with ducks, which was like rubber ducks. And it was like, okay, long story
You
short,
know,
he was always struggling to get his mother-in-law, who lived in Nigeria, to come over and stuff. Long story
yeah.
short, 3 months later, he ran off with an Irish bodybuilder.
Oh well, good for him, as long as he found
So
happiness.
he found, not very kind on the old wife, but yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But obviously, it took him a while to reach the conclusion of where his where his butter was spread. But
Yeah.
I think it's very much there's definitely potentially that market for some of this, isn't there? Yeah.
You could actually take some of these paragraphs. I'm going to skip forward a couple of paragraphs because this is like someone's writing his dating profile at the end of the day. It really is, because it continues. Thongor could happily have exercised for hours more. His simple barbarian life during the long years he had brawled and wandered across the continent of Lemuria as bandit chieftain, mercenary swordsman, assassin, thief, pirate, and adventurer made him more at home in the rude warrior's barracks than in the palace of a Sark. But for nearly 2 years now, a trick of destiny or whim of the 19 gods had given him a place on the throne of Patanga beside the woman he loved, first as Sark of Patanga, and now as Sarkon of the Three Cities, overlord or high king of a vigorously growing young empire. He shrugged, grinning. His uncomplicated Northlander philosophy bade him accept whatever came his way. It's like a LinkedIn profile,
It is,
isn't it?
It's got live, laugh, love on the side of the castle.
Written in third person. I'm tempted to go on LinkedIn and convert this paragraph to a first person thing. So just post it on, like, what LinkedIn is like. It's Facebook for wankers, isn't it?
Yes.
When you read the posts that people put on there. So just put on there, I can happily exercise for hours. My simple barbarian life during the long years I have brawled and wandered across the continent of Lemuria as a bandit chieftain, etc., 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 make me more at home in the rude warrior's barracks than in the palace of a Sark. I shrug, I grin, and my uncomplicated whole philosophy bids me accept whatever comes my way. Yes.
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 I think that'd get you a long way.
I think that's your next word to the troops, isn't it? That's see, but you can see if anyone actually reads them.
Yeah. Next time I change jobs,
Yeah.
and I have to do like an intro with the new deputy director or something, I might just retask some of this.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. You don't really, for the first half of this book, you don't really get a sense of who or what Thongor is, other than he can exercise for days, he looks incredible, he's sweaty and gorgeous, his men think he's awesome, he's at home in the rude barracks, whatever the fuck rude barracks are.
And he lives, laughs, and loves.
He lives, laughs, and loves, but his bird gets kidnapped anyway by some villain in a silver skyship.
Yeah.
Oh no. And
a
that's
ninja.
what kicks off the conflict. Yeah. Yeah, a Lemurian space ninja type thing.
But in the second book, it's more they go to war, and it's more on a grand scale. But it all goes to pot because they're ambushed by invisible Blue Plains people due to evil magics of the evil wizard cabal.
Yeah, and in all honesty, I don't think I will ever get to it because, confession, I couldn't finish this book.
My God, you're a reader machine.
It's rare for me to not finish a book, but I just got to the point with this where it was sapping my will to live, because I'm going to read a bit more, and this is what so much of the book is like, and it just gets exhausting. So it says, dawn broke over Patanga, putting to an end the troubled turmoil of the night. Calm Carvers, who had not slept nor rested, summoned a council in the first hours of dawn. The palace was a scene of confusion. Officers and nobles hurrying hither and thither, messengers bearing reports and orders, squads of warriors racing to man their posts. Thongor had not returned, nor had the far-ranging floaters of the air fleet found a trace of the stolen
Floaters
princess.
is not a good name.
To the council came the leaders of the Sarkdom. Lord Mail, his grizzled lion's mane dishevelled, his brow lined with worry, stout red-faced old Baron Selvarus, who had served Sumia's father, the late Sark, and who now lent his loyal devotion to her mate, Thongor, and Prince Drew, lean, witty, sardonic, but now his mocking jests were still, an unwanted soberness marked his gallant demeanour. Hither, too, came wise old Eodrim, the archpriest of Father Gorm and hierarch of the Temple of the 19 Gods, to lend his sagacity to these desperate councils. Cam Carvis wasted no time on idle ceremony. He opened the council with a concise and pointed survey of the events of the previous night. Our council, then, is confronted with a threefold problem. Where is the Sarkaya, Sumia, who has stolen her, and for what grim end? Where is our Lord Thongor, and how does he fare? And to what coming danger are these curious events a prelude? In other terms, Cam Carvis, Prince Drew interrupted, does the kidnapping of the princess mean an act of war against us by some as yet unnamed nation, or was it just a stroke of malice and revenge on the part of a single enemy? Correct, Prince. What precautions could be taken I have already put into action, Cam Carvis continued. The alarm has been given, the guards are trebled, exerting fullest alertness. The air guard is still searching the surrounding country. Heralds have been dispatched in the swiftest airboats to bear the alarm to Ald Termis in Shembis and all-Barbarian Thon in Thirdis, bidding them be on watch. Gorm's blood! Begging your pardon, my lord archpriest. You think then, lad, the stealing of the princess was but prologue to an invasion, an act meant to disrupt and panic us so that Patanga might be thrown off balance and taken all the easier for the confusion and breakdown in morale? Lord Mail rumbled. Cam Carvis nodded grimly. The old Baron of Tassoni swore sulphurously. The treacherous sneaking worms, to war on women. Selverus growled. But what foe have we with Thirdis and Shembis whelmed and occupied by our staunchest friends? Surely not Zangabal or Pelorm, nor even Cathul to the north. They have exchanged embassies with us, and now they have naught to fear from Thongor. Cam Carvis agreed. Aye, Lord Selverus, but we have filled half of Lemuria with disgruntled enemies. The Druids of Yamath, whom Thongor exiled, who may well have settled in some nearby realm and there slyly provoked the slumbering ambitions of an otherwise friendly monarch. And there is Eversargol to the south, that city and its red brotherhood of the foul demon god Slidith. They have not forgotten the insult Thongor held in their teeth when he stole into the tower of women-headed serpents and thieved away the Starstone under their noses. Nay, no more they have forgiven him for escaping from the arena of punishment, slaying the sacred Zemadar and the Sark of Sargol, Dragunda Thal himself. And it just goes on and on and on. The next paragraph,
really,
you've got
it
the
needs a
waters
PowerPoint
of...
presentation, doesn't it?
It's fucking mental.
PowerPoint presentation.
It's mental. The next paragraph, you've got the waters of Shazangezumjum, the Southern Sea. Then you've got more of the Druids of Yamath. Oh, it's relentless.
But the thing is, I didn't
fucking
mind that
relentless.
because the book's only 150 pages, so it's not quite as painful as I think you're. Well, I didn't find it as quite as painful.
I found it absolutely exhausting.
Whereas a friend of mine who shall remain nameless, but it's nothing I haven't said to his face, self-published a book based on some Cthulhu stuff.
Yeah.
And he did that, that thing in games where you stop and you say, oh, what's going on? And you kind of and you say, oh, and you consider your options. I mean, it was very wittily recounted and captured and written, but he captured all those conversations. And I was like, I've got to fade through this and I can't do this anymore because like every chapter they're having this conversation. And that's fine in a game, but that's not a book. So I think that kind of washed over me a bit because it was within my tolerance levels for whatever reason.
If you were running a game, and apologies to listeners who are non-gamers, because we're referencing everything back to gaming, but just go with us for a second. If you were running a game, and some scenarios start with like something that is quite a common thing in D&D games. And published adventures where you read something out to the players to set the scene, rather than it's tell not show. So you get a big tract of stuff to read. I would love to do an experiment where you introduce the players to a council and say you've been brought in because there's trouble at mill, and then you just use that chapter as the basis to set the scene for the players, and watch them all slip off the chairs under the table and start to snore or just lose the will to live.
What I would like to do is take that chapter and then convert it to modern management speak and have it like be, and here's our dashboard, and you can see we've got risks, we've got the Druids of Yamas.
Yeah.
We've got the trespass upon the games of such and such.
Mm.
And sort of break down and satirize it that way. But yeah,
I think we should move on from Thongor.
definitely.
We've talked about Thongor a little bit, but I'm
Brak's
just
more
going to
interesting,
contrast.
I think.
Yeah, I'm going to contrast that just with a little bit of Brak.
Mm-hmm.
So in the second story, in Brak the Barbarian, which interesting cover, by the way, very, very unlike any of the ones that we're generally used to, because there are Brak covers where, and some of them are pretty poor, but there are Brak covers where he's big and muscular and he's got his blonde hair and his blonde plait. One of them's Frank Frazetta. I've got a Brak versus the Sorceress, which is a Frank Frazetta pen, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But some of the others, I've got a Brak versus the Mark of the Demons, I think, one, and the cover art's awful.
I've got that one, which the cover art's not great, I don't think.
I quite like that one. I don't think it's particularly representative of the content.
It's not representative at all.
Yeah, but it's much better than the awful, shonky, muscly
and I've got the same
barbarian
one as you, with the javelin and the javelin with the thing for a spear thrower on it.
So this is a
curious sword.
Tandem novel from I don't know, what year is this from?
So just for background, the guy who wrote this is the same guy who wrote North versus South, which, if you're a child of the 80s, you might remember being a big TV miniseries event.
Yeah,
the American Civil War series. He wrote the novel, which that was based. Well, the doorstep novel that was based on.
It was a trilogy. It was an epic Civil War trilogy, which sold shitloads. But he wrote that after. So if you go back to the 60s, John Jakes is writing short stories, science fiction, various other bits and pieces. Then in the 70s, he writes a series of books that were like about they were contemporary fiction about, and this was before he did his Civil War novels. They were based around the centenary of the United States as a nation.
Oh, right, 1976,
Yeah, and he wrote a series of them, and they sold 55 million copies. These
Bloody
books.
hell.
That's not even getting to the North and South trilogy. That became another phenomenon, got turned into the big prestige TV series that you've referenced. So when you think about all of these authors who were writing all of this stuff, he has got to be hands down the most successful author to have ever written Conan pastiche fiction.
Well, I think in terms of cultural impact, there's probably an argument for God the Fox, but that's we'll come on to that.
Cultural impact perhaps, but raw commercial success as an author. Wow, he absolutely nailed his career by the 1980s, the amount that he sold. And the interesting thing about him, it's not like after the success he moved on that quickly from his early stuff either, because he wrote his last Brak novel in 1980. So this is after he sold tens of millions of copies of this contemporary series, based around the centenary of the United States. And his output did slow down a little bit, but he still wrote a handful of other novels. And he died last year, aged 90. So he's writing the North and South stuff in his 60s. Yeah. So what a crazy career he had. And fun fact, related to one of our occasional topics of conversation here when we talk about IP fiction, he wrote the novelization of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes in the early 70s.
Did he?
He did, yeah. And I only know that Titan released a load of Planet of the Apes novel omnibuses, and my dad got me a couple of them for my birthday, and that's one of them. Yeah. So there you go. But this is so it's published in '68. This, and really, it's a fix-up novel of 4-5 short stories. I can't remember.
The first one
exactly.
is
yeah, and they are surprisingly good. And when you think about John Jakes, what you know about him now, of course, it makes sense that these are well written, I suppose, especially compared to some of the other stuff that we've looked at or read. It's surprisingly good. Yeah, I mean,
he's got a real eye for a monster. I mean, in the first, he's terrible at naming monsters. Fangfish and Doomdog and
Doomdog.
Yeah. But in the first story, he's confronted by these urchins that have like sort of crystallized eyes and
finger needles.
Yeah, and it's just really, really creepy. And the design of the aforementioned Doomdog and Fangfish. I mean, I've read a third one which I don't think I have on the shelf anymore. I think it's in the loft on a holiday a couple of years ago. But he's got a really good turn of crafting an almost disconcerting, deformed kind of creature. And when we come on to Mark of the Demons, he does an interesting. I think he does an interesting take on a different variant of a well-worn trope.
We commented when we were talking about Conan, like how Robert E. Howard was a fucking master at opening paragraphs that suck you in. And the opening paragraph of this is fucking great. It goes, God is dead. Tittering and drooling, the crazed-eyed mendicant rattled his copper bowl and blocked the narrow street. Filthy hair hung to his shoulders. His teeth were rotted brown stumps. Gaining no immediate response from the huge brawny barbarian whom he'd chosen to stop and importune, the mendicant whined all the more insistently. God is dead. The abominations be praised. A dinshire for this most deserving and humble of the Dark One's spawn. A coin, said the barbarian. Beg elsewhere. One coin only, barbarian. Get away from me. Only one, lord and master. I said, get away. A gigantic nausea filled the belly of the strapping stranger whose way the mendicant blocked. Smells of offal, of drugs, sweet sputtering torchwood, narrow thoroughfares that still managed to exude a stink despite the crispness of the frosty air, all mingled together in the nostrils of the big man, making him want to choke or curse or both. He had walked through the wall gate of Kamdai Kai at chill sunset and had been wandering wonderstruck in its riotous streets for the better part of this night. Everywhere he'd seen nothing but squalor, sharp practices, licentiousness. If this were the dazzle of the great civilized kingdoms that lay between him and fabled Kurdistan, then he had erred in taking the southern road out of the high steppes, the wild lands of the north. Really strong opener. You've got your character established as a big brawny barbarian without us, being tempted to wank about his physical prowess and ability to exercise for days. And you've set up the entire character of this city really, really quickly. I think it's super, super effective. It sets up the barbarian from the north in a city of vice and beggars and cults and violence. And it's already brimming with undercurrents and violence, even before the youngsters get stuck in.
And what it also does, which is a theme that runs through the 3 ones that I've read, it sets up the, which I think is where Brak is different to some of these other ones. It sets up the theological question.
Yep.
At the heart of Brak, because there is an issue with, shall we say, vaguely Cthulhuid and demonic activity contrasted to a small and struggling monotheism, which recurs throughout the books, which Brak is not necessarily a participant in, but becomes a participant in that religion, but is opposed to the more infernal activities, and so is an ally, despite maybe not being a believer. Yeah, and from that very first chapter, he's kind of set the seed for that in that mendicant's ranting.
Yeah, there's a definite, almost Christian church analogue there, isn't there? Where we've got references. There's a character who's a friar, who I think is a recurring character, Friar John or whatever his name is. And there's the chapter actually kicks off with a quote from the Vision of Nestorianus. And again, just the use of language. The Nestorians were a Christian cult, like an ancient Christian cult. So Nestorianus, Nestorians. There are all these little kind of parallels and little bits of wordplay that bring in this idea. Because that says the chapter's called The Unspeakable Shrine. And it says, the stars are trailing clouds of sin while heroes drowse and dream as temples crack and tumble in. Mad holy men blaspheme. Behind the soul's dark night begin. Yab Hagoth rules supreme. Yab Hagoth, that's, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, Lovecraft, they were all trading, names of ancient horrors, but Yob Hagoth fits nicely into any of those kind of.
Indeed,
you could imagine seeing Yob Hagoth in the 1982 Call of Cthulhu box set list of deities, alongside any of those.
And it's quite interesting, isn't it? But is it the witch is pursuing him? She's after him.
I don't know.
It's not the same as Kothar, where that's a definite theme. but where he kills it's the sorcerer, isn't it? It's the sorcerer with the writhing bodies on his skin.
Yes.
Who's ritually disturbs.
Yep.
There's a scene where he's almost taken up like Jesus on the Mount and tempted in a chariot. It's like to try and get him away. So there's some stuff that's quite on the nose, but there's some other stuff that's really, really good. Is it this one where later on he's on the funeral barge?
I can't remember.
Because there's
the second story is when he's in like a penal mine.
Yeah,
that's the one with the
penal
doom
mine
dog,
one where he leads the revolt, which are great. That's it, the Barge of Souls, which I think is after the penal mine one. But basically, this barge goes down the river with all the supplicants of the kingdom sort of celebrating the demise.
Yeah,
and he basically rescues the princess who's basically been manipulated into this position to her doom by courtiers and stuff. But it's that's the one with horned lady imagery, who's like another sort of religious imagery and goddess.
Yeah,
but
that's actually the longest. That's the longest, most substantial story in the book, isn't it?
Yeah, because he starts off on the battlefield and then ends up on the barge. But just the sort of imagery of this whole river with mourners on the sides and then him ending up battling the sort of guards of the funeral barge. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
I actually would go as far as to say this is easily at the top of the pile when it comes to, the Conan pastiche type stuff. And it's hands down better than any of the non-Robert E. Howard Conan stuff as well. I really like Brak as a character too. He's quite satisfyingly subdued and generally fairly laid back unless provoked.
And he's fairly chaste as well. He doesn't have that kind of animalistic... I mean, Conan's generally respectful with some notable exceptions like the Frost Giant's daughter, which are problematic. But Brak's not like that. There's some implications that he may have had some relationships with some characters he meets along the way, but broadly speaking, he's quite chaste. He's very focused on his self-contained and focused on his.
I think it's a reflection of probably where John Jakes is coming from with a lot of these stories. With those, not that I'm a Christian or anything like that, but some of the themes that they're slightly less nihilistic. It's in some ways, even though the world is full of horrors, there is a streak of there being elements that are more hopeful. And Brak represents that to a degree. He's firmly in the do unto others as they would do unto you camp. And as long as he's got a few bob, some tucker, a pony and a sword, he's pretty chipper. You don't get the sense that he would pursue power in the way that the likes of Conan and Thongor do.
No,
now I've not read them all, and I've not got to the later Brak stories, so I don't know where it goes. But I think that makes him quite an appealing hero.
Yeah. He's more interested in. He's got his goal, which is to get to Kurdistan. A bit like this kind of Western thing. If somebody stands in the way of that goal, that's going to be a problem. Yeah. And if he sees abuses happening in the course of that goal, that's going to be a problem. So that's Brak the Barbarian. Shall we turn to Mark of the Demon, which I really enjoyed. Not only because it's got like a dated cigarette ad in the middle of my paperback copy.
Oh, nice.
Yes. Alive with pleasure.
Tell us about Brak and the Mark of the Demon, because I've not got round to reading it.
Have you not got... Oh. No. See, he gives me homework. I go and do it. So, Brak and the Mark of the Demon is, he says, refresh it, because I didn't make any notes, because I thought Andy will be on this call. It'll be fine. Starts off with him in a desert, injured. He comes across to and protects from attack from like a pterodactyl type thing, if I remember correctly, but probably has some terrible name. To vaguely wan twins in outfits glittering with gems.
Swish.
And he gets them, and the two of them to a caravan, and then there's politics around the caravan. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil it. But people on the caravan get weak, and they're also ending up traveling through territory where there's like bandits, or they're called something terrible like the Mongolians or something like that. But there's like these desert stroke plain raiders, and there's stuff with sandstorms and all this. But people with the caravans are going weak. Sort of Brak's promoted within the structure of the caravan. He's got kind of a nice, realistic relationship with quite an assertive and capable daughter of the caravan owner, and a rivalry with the captain, the kind of guy who's the caravan guard. And it progresses, and it ends up being taken captive after many twists and turns. So it's one continual story by the horse barbarians. The twins who have been there all the time while people have been getting weak on the caravan, subverting the city that they're taken into. And it all ends up with one big confrontation. So it's playing with certain Gothic monster tropes, as you may well have guessed already.
Yeah.
But it does a lot of interesting things with them. And what's interesting is it's less about mesmerism and stuff. It's more about how they play on their sort of social status or their perceived social status to kind of manipulate people around them. It's really, I really, really enjoyed it because it's one of those where obviously, like, if you're watching a slasher film or something, you're like, don't go up the stairs. And obviously you're reading this and you're like, it's them. Fucking hit them with your sword. Hit them with your sword. Yeah. Although that might not actually work, right? But, it's them. That's why that person's got mad and wandered off into the desert and died. Get them! And we've said about John Jakes' writing before. He does it really well. So the frustration doesn't overwhelm you.
I think he's pretty terrific, to be honest. And there is just a description of some of the action in the mining one with the Doom Dog. When it comes to his naming of things, sometimes I do like him. At the beginning of Brak versus the Sorceress, the opening part is called the Manworm Pit.
Yeah,
and it's the same setup as a lot of these like short Brak vignettes where there's probably an evil woman, there's some kind of cult, and there's some kind of beast. And the Manworm Pit is just an instantly fantastic, evocative name for a chapter. I really, really like it. But so there's this bit where Brak has realised, he's in the prison, he's realising that he's been betrayed. And it says, Brak's mind sang a single word, betrayal. Jath had been sobbing. Now the yellow-haired barbarian thought he knew why. He lay for only a heart's thud longer, letting them hold him. Fresh chains clinked in the corridor. Men shoved forward with new shackles. Their torches glared on drawn broadswords. The overseer's bad eye stood out in flicker and shadow, moist and horrible, disembodied, suspended in space. Brak knew he could not wait. Giving one violent swallow, he dragged his legs back, doubling them at the knees and toppling the men who had been holding him. Then he kicked out with all his strength. The big barbarian's right foot caught the chin of one of the guards who had tumbled away a moment ago. The power of Brak's leg thew. Oh, God, that word thew. I really don't like that word. The power of Brak's leg thew turned his foot into a juggernaut that snapped the man's head violently to the right. The mercenary's neck snapped even as he shrieked and writhed to his feet. In the confines of the cell, the cries touched off pandemonium. Jerking up to a sitting position, Brak caught the bronze greave of the nearest guard and tugged. The man stumbled. Brak jumped up and wrenched the broadsword from the man's hand, using it to chop a great arc left to right. At short range, the stroke had tremendous force. The man's head fell from his neck and rolled. The headless body jetted blood that laved fierce and red over the barbarian. Growling animal-like, Brak thrust downward, hard and at angle. One stiff whack with the broadsword's edge, and the weakened link snapped in half. There was hesitation among the guards. The overseer howled, "Got him! Got the outlander, you weak-bellied worms!" But fear held them off. Brak was an awful sight, naked save for the lion hide, his ankles dragging chains as he charged, his wild yellow braid flying out, his sword arm springing back and then ramming forward. The soldier nearest him could not parry in time. Brak's blade opened his bowels. The barbarian hauled his sword free of the corpse and kicked the body aside. He jumped across the ruin of the headless man and, turning swiftly, brought a stroke of vast power down across the nose of the next man in line. The front half of the man's head was hacked open by the savage cut. Fresh blood gouted. Oaths, shrill yells of panic, the blundering of terrified men set up a fearsome din in the tiny cell. Scenting freedom close, Brak closed both hands on the broadsword's haft and began to hew a red path towards the door. Another guard perished. Another. Others jabbed their spears at him, but more cautiously now, edging away from him into the corridor. In the other cells, prisoners had set up a maniacal clamour of encouragement, approval. I think that's really good. It's really cinematic.
Yeah.
It's really direct. It's really simple.
Yeah.
Again, there's no references to how bronzed and gorgeous he is. It's just really straightforward, simple. It's
Action.
a force of nature. These guys are in fucking trouble. There's an absolute room of them, and you can almost smell the sense that they're all suddenly realizing what they've got in front of them and what they're in store for. Yeah, and as the chapter goes on, he frees them all. There's a big battle. The evil princess who has, done the dirty on her dad. He ends up.
And she tries to kind of do a poor little innocent me at the end, and he's not having any of it. Yeah,
there's a little bit of ambiguity at the end as to what happens, because of course this is essentially a short story, and when you move on to the next part, it's just a brand new story.
Yeah,
essentially he slings her over his shoulder, and the suggestion is that he's just going to give her to the slaves.
Yeah, which is pretty grim.
Yeah,
but I mean that's another thing in this, because in Thongor there's a recurring lyric which heads some of the chapters or breaks up the chapters, which is like the song of the black dragons. It is sometimes, or sometimes it acts a prophecy. I think Jakes does the same thing, but he manages to make it much more directly linked into the story. So he doesn't do it in Mark of the Demons, which is obviously a longer form work, but in the chapter that you're referring to, like on page 51 in my edition, he actually has effectively a poem or a lyric that is the song of this rebellion. And I think
the song of the Toctish rebellion.
Yeah, which you could lift and use in anything, But I like the fact that rather than kind of going through the motions, Minkasa has perhaps he's put a little bit more thought into where he's using those devices, and it's even more ingrained to the plot or more tailored to what happens.
I think it's just a better author.
Case. Yeah, but that's an evidence of it, for the fact that he is not just going, right, I must write Canto 34 of the Song of the Dragons. It's like, no, what's this one about? Okay, so this will be a verse of a poem about a ghost, or this will be the Song of the Revolting Slaves, because that helps me advance the rest of my writing, rather than just being something I do just a ritual I do every chapter. Yeah,
there's a thematic purpose to it.
Yeah.
Rather than, as you say, it just being the ritual, right? New chapter must start with quote from, for example, Chronic of the Black Sword, or whatever it might be. Yeah, it actually makes some kind of logical sense, and it adds to the overall value of the context of the narrative in the John Jakes stuff.
The layers of the world as well, because it's different pieces from different places.
Yeah.
So we've blown enough smoke. We've blown quite a lot of smoke up John Jakes' arse, but I think we can see why.
Final note on John Jakes. In 1980, he wrote about the origins of Brak, and he said, "It was in the role of dedicated Conan fan that I wrote the first Brak tale, Devils in the Walls. In spirit, anyway, the story was a Howard pastiche, and I've acknowledged the fact more than once. In an earlier preface, he was explicit about why he created Brak. He said, my motive for giving birth to Brak and his parallel universe on an old black ironwood was much simpler. There are just not enough stories of this kind to go around anymore, not enough anyway to please me. So to help fill this dismal gap, well or badly, I hope never indifferently, my barbarian with the long yellow braid and the light of the south horizon glittering in his eyes was born." So, he wrote them because he wanted more stories like this.
He wanted to read. It's what he wanted to read, isn't it?
Yeah. So, good stuff. Now, you've been exploring some other Barbarian / Conan knockoffs, and you mentioned Gardner F. Fox earlier on.
Yes.
So Kothar was Gardner F. Fox's first, wasn't it? And then he got bored of him and wrote about Kirik.
I didn't read Kirik.
Well, sorry, I didn't read Kothar either.
Well, I read Kothar. Did you read
Oh,
Kothar?
nope. Yeah, I sent you Kothar and Kirik, but I'm relying on you to tell me what they're like.
I'm not going to... Well, I didn't read Kirik because, A,
Yeah.
he's a warlock, so I think he's
Oh,
off
right,
topic.
okay. Fair.
So, but I did read Kothar. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about Kothar. So, first of all, we've talked about the Ulfr in each case. So, let's talk about, he says playing for time, Gardner F. Fox.
Oh, yeah, bigwig, big DC bigwig. Yeah.
Yep, so this is a guy who invented a lot of Silver Age superheroes like Hawkman. He wasn't behind the Silver Age Flash. That was, off the top of my head, Schwartz, wasn't he? But he was very much in the coattails of Schwartz and wrote loads of other stuff in that
Original Sandman
era. Yeah.
Co-created Barbara Gordon.
Yeah. So tons and tons of DC lore he added to, all for a paycheck, and probably didn't see a lot in terms of royalties, as we know how DC worked at the time. So Kothar is, we mentioned Jack Vance earlier on. Jack Vance's universe is Clark Ashton Smithian or Vancian in that humanity is expanded across the universe and then descended to barbarism and magic. But they are conscious of this, so there are references to other planets and things when they're talking about magic and demons. He doesn't start off, despite being hulking and huge and enormous, in a fur nappy. He actually starts on a battlefield, and I think I'm going to steal a plan from you, and I will read the first 4 very brief paragraphs on the first page to give you an idea of the writing and the style. So, the blood lay red on his dented mail shirt and his spotted yellow hair in a ghastly fashion. It ran wetly, redly, from the worn sleeve of his leather haqueton to drop upon his big hand and ooze upon the pommel of his shattered sword. It stained his fur kilt and riding boots and dripped steadily with every step he took. Kothar staggered from the field of battle, where men lay staring sightlessly up at the darkening sky, rigid now in death, and where other men were gasping out their lives. He alone of the loyal foreign guard was still alive. He alone still held a sword in his hand, though it was a broken one. And behind him, men were coming fast to finish off the youthful guard's commander. He was a big, brawny youth. A shock of yellow hair framed a face burned brown by desert suns and polar winds. Under his smooth hide, giant muscles rippled, and normally he walked with the springy gait of a man whose body was in perfect fighting trim. A broad leather belt fitted his lean waist, from which hung an empty scabbard. Now that belt was red with blood. Kothar was a barbarian out of the northern world of Cumberia. He was a sellsword, a mercenary whose life was given over to the god of war, that he might have food for his belly and a pillow at times for his head. There was no fear in him as he jogged along. He was afraid of no living man, or woman for that matter, though he did admit to a kind of queasiness when magic, witches and warlocks were involved, and a witch had given Lord Markov victory this day.
Very Conan.
Very, very Conan. And sort of in the, I'd say, halfway house between Lynn Carter and Brak, in the dripping over the warming muscles. So, effectively, Lord Markov has disposed his wonderful queen, aided by Red Lorry, not Red Lorry, Blue Lorry, Green Lorry, Lorry, Lori. He fights a number of guards, he manages to escape, and he crashes into a tomb with a mummy, but then turns around and starts talking to him, because in fact it is an ancient sorcerer of days of yore that is going to tell him how to save the kingdom. Basically involves him taking possession of a magic sword that is a truly wondrous weapon, and he successfully restores his queen, and the witch is left in a cage, naked of course, as the gloriously beautiful red-headed witch would be, where she can say, "I'll get you, Kothar!" Perhaps betraying guard Frostfire, that's the name of the sword, and sort of psychically tease him through much of the following books.
Hmm.
Although there is a nice way he kind of gets out of this. So she's kind of lost her magic powers, but she can still kind of reach out to other entities and people for influence or to try and get revenge on him. There is a very queasy element where he, with some misplaced humour, threatens to rape the queen as a reward. Yeah. And there is also, but there is a nice touch in that the sword's really great, but he can't possess wealth while he has the sword. So he can either give up the sword or he can keep the sword, and he makes the decision to keep the sword. So that's the MacGuffin. That's the Bill Baxby always putting his thumb out for a lift at the end of the episode that keeps him driving through the further stories. Because even when he sees an opportunity for a score in the subsequent stories, he won't get those rewards, or he'll be forced to give them up, or he'll give them up out the kindness of his heart, etc., etc., as things go on. And then very much it carries on in a very Conan-esque way. The naming conventions are slightly annoying. So he's a Cumberian. So I know you've mentioned before some of the Hyborian names are a bit on the nose, but some of these are even... And there's an empire, which is obviously very Roman, with a decadent empire and tortured slaving girls and evil bears and stuff. And its capital is Rom.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of...
try harder. Try a little bit harder.
You could... there's some nice character elements in terms of, like, his horse has quite a lot of personality. For most of the book, he has a horse greyling, and that horse has a personality to it that kind of comes through. The majority of the villains are femme fatales in one form or another, and they're normally more or little witchy. At one point, he kind of has to rescue Laurie to deliver a plot, and then he actually manages to, at the end, when she goes down into a tomb to get something, he seals her in it, because witches can't pass silver. He melts bars of silver and locks her permanently down there. Therefore getting rid of... So he's smart as well, as we're being brave and capable. But I'd say it definitely falls between the two stools of the quality of Brak and the Linkata pastiche. There's some quite nice horror bits, and there's some quite nice witchy bits. I wouldn't rush out to get the second volume, but certainly if I saw it going cheap, I'd pick it up and finish it off for sure.
Well, the reason I never read it is because I ordered and sent you the copies, and then I delayed ordering mine because we were going away for a few days, and then I just forgot to order it and forgot all about it.
Kothar's bowels must be in a terrible state because he never eats any vegetables.
Ooh.
It's always a plate of steaming meat, a wheel of cheese, and some good dark bread. So I'm not really on holiday thinking, get some vegetables in you, man.
Keeps him lean, just a bit bunged up probably.
Maybe
I bet his farts
loosens him up. Yeah.
Yeah. Whilst I was thinking about this stuff, I was thinking, what else have I got on the shelves? And I've had one on the shelf for years called Spearmen of Arn. And I thought, maybe I'll pull that off and have a look at that. But it turns out it's a Sword and Planet story. It's not a barbarian from the north. It's an Earthman who gets catapulted to some weird place. So I skipped that one. But I did come across one that I picked up at a second-hand bookshop about a year ago called Swords of the Barbarians by Kenneth Bulmer. A sword and sorcery saga in the great tradition of Conan by Kenneth Bulmer. Kenneth Bulmer was a hugely prolific British writer of science fiction, but I don't think he did that much pure fantasy. And this is definitely a case where he seems to be thinking, well, I'll get in on a bit of that. And got a nice cover, which is very, very appropriate to the genre. I've not got around to reading it yet, but I flipped it open and I thought, I quite like this. I think I'm going to escalate up my read list, because the moment I started reading it, it just read like not so much a Conan novel, but more one of those books that you read in the 80s, which were based upon D&D or role-playing.
All right,
where it's very much a setup where you've got a party of characters, rather than one, core character. So I mean, the back
like a Dragonlance or something.
Yeah, but no elves. An adventuring party kind of setup. So at the back it says, a massive migration of the gods threatens the march of Gamelon with apocalyptic change. Only Tor Vorkon of Darkholme and his lovely twin sister Tara can preserve order and prepare the people for a new era. Tor is a magnificently powerful youth who bears the magical broadsword Lie Cheaper. Lie Cheaper? Tara, too, is magnificent, yet a secret power lies in the witchery she can invoke when naked.
Crikey!
So, but I just flipped it up and I thought, right, okay, let's have a look. So there are a few more characters involved here, but it goes, lively, Tor leapt sideways, and lively Tara leapt the other. Curved and bloody, Tor's scimitar slashed in to grind and catch and break on a silver-gilt mail. With a stump of metal in his hand, Tor faced the giant man with the giant axe. With a fuming courage, Freglar dashed in from the side, halberd low, caught the giant over the hip, span him round. With a bellow, he brought the axe down, missing Freglar, but splintering the halberd haft to kindling. Number one, someone's using a fucking halberd.
I approve of the halberd. Yeah.
Yeah. Weaponless, the three faced the axeman, warily, backing away, hands spread, their eyes concentrating on every bunching of muscle, on every sudden eye movement. He made a dart at Tara, span, quickly, swung down on Frelgar, who squeaked, and all rabbity-hoppity toppled over a chair and went down in a flurry of silks and laces. See, I like Frelgar already. Red blood spouted, but Murga shook it away and swung again, raging, the axe a shimmering arc above his head. All tumbled, as he was, Frelgar thrust out a filthy foot with the dungeon straws still lodged between the toes. Murga of the axe hooked an ankle and went down. Savagely, Tor beat a fist at the giant's nape, but the blow caught a muscled shoulder, staggering Murga lopsidedly into the remnants of the chair. Like a crazed Hriguara in rut, he bounded up again. His broad face now showed a tinge of surprise. These three had not yet tasted the cleaving power of his axe, and this puzzled Murga of the axe mightily. Scrambling frantically, Frelgar staggered away to one side as Tor tried to draw the giant on. He skipped the axe blade, leapt in, feeling his hollow stomach rebel, smashed a blow into Murga's belly. The axeman woofed, but brought the axe up again. Over by the alcove between the young castle-like wide windows, Tara saw a stand of arms against the drapes. Weapons glinted there, an edge here, a point there, catching reflections of the sunlight that streamed in on either side of the stand. She reached out, selected, snatched, whirled. In the act of sliding a glancing blow of the axe that would have jellied a lesser man's brains, Tor Vorkon heard his sister's call. He pivoted, stuck up a hand, aimed to cut the end of his spinning, glinting, silvery trajectory that flew from his sister's hand to his own. He felt the solid thump of wound silver wire in his palm. Lightly, he rose on the balls of his feet, swinging in to face the roaring form of Murga the axe. Lie Cheaper flamed. Now, giant of Znundabugoffel, defend yourself! So I read that page, I thought, you know what, this is all right.
They need a meeting. They need a meeting. A meeting.
It's a short book. I think I'm going to give that a read. It's only 127 pages, and it looks very much like someone's written up their D&D game from last weekend.
Yeah. The only other barbarian text which I have, which is not a novel, is Barbarian Lord, which I know we discussed, and you have. I don't know how you describe that art style. You've got a better way with words than me.
I don't know. It's very comic book, but it's also got a pleasingly almost a Gendy Tarkovsky kind of
Tchaikovsky type of clean lines. So this is it's quite Viking, and it's called Barbarian Lord. It's by Matt Smith, and I was lucky enough to get it for $5 from a charity shop. It's all black and white and grayscale. Effectively, he's been done out of his inheritance by a dodgy neighbour called Skullface, who literally has a skull for a face. And he set a number of sort of geezers or challenges by Skullface. And it's very Norse in terms of doing those challenges, poetry, fighting trolls, fighting bears, those kind of things, dragons. But it's got a lovely set of green lines, and Barbarian Lord has that very rugged, individualistic, complete, dedication to the goal. Very movie Conan in the set upon revenge aspect, which fits it beautifully. It's a lovely sort of read. If you can't pick it up, I think it's out of print and it is quite dear now, although I think it can be read online legally. because it is very much in the same wheelhouse, although while it does have fantastical elements of trolls and stuff, it is maybe a little bit more grounded than the pure fantasy or pseudo science fiction stuff we've been discussing.
I think the moral of this entire conversation is that we have barely scratched the surface of Conan pastiche and barbarian fiction.
Well, we
And
haven't
there's
even
so much more of
discussed
it out there.
movies, really.
No, well,
No.
one day perhaps. Well, the last thing I'll mention when I talk about this Kenneth Bulmer book is it's a New English Library book from 1970, and it's got an advertisement in the back for a book called The Crazy Ladies, and
Ooh.
all it says is Crazy New Year 71. The pleasure of your pleasure is requested by Simone, Anita, Lou, and Beverly. Not forgetting Robert Fingerhood, super sex star. 8 shillings in paperback.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure it stimulated many a furtive imagination back in the day.
Yeah, so this New English Library before, I mean, they haven't even got the classic NEL logo yet. This is remarkably good condition for a 54-year-old first edition. Yeah, it's very good, Nick. Very nice. On that super sex star bombshell, it's probably past my bedtime. Got to go to bed and dream of Thongor.
Dream of Kothar. Dream of Brak. Brak's the one, isn't he? That's the recommendation for this episode. Read some Brak.
Yeah, I'll probably read a bit more Brak in bed tonight, actually.
Yeah.
I read the Man-Worm Pit. I need to get past the Man-Worm Pit and do the next bit.
I have read Brak and the Sorceress is the one I read a couple of years ago. Like I say, I think it's either in the loft or it's the one I sent to you. I think I might have sent it to you. I'm not sure. Did I send it to you with Beasts of Valhalla?
Yeah, you did. I can't remember which one it was. I've got Brak and the Sorceress. The Sorceress was the first Brak novel I ever came across.
Yeah.
Probably about 20 years ago, and it's sat on a shelf for donkey's years, but God knows where it is. That's the one with the Frank Frazetta cover. And it's the only one that ever had a Frank Frazetta cover. Yeah, it's very nice. Very nice cover, but fuck knows where
Frank
it is.
Frazetta, say no more.
Definitely a case of Thongor, well, if you're a completist and you don't mind reading some Barsoom pastiche, but definitely Brak for the win if you want to actually read something decent.
And Kothar's perfectly passable, I'd say. There's some nice bits and pieces in Kothar, but I'd say if it was Desert Island Barbarian books and the sea washed up and you were left with one and you didn't have any Howard for some reason. Well, I presume with the Bible and Shakespeare, so you get like Howard automatically.
Yeah.
It would be Brak that I'd suggest that you go for. And I would suggest reading Mark of the Demon or versus Mark of the Demon. Because I was really, when I first started reading it was like, this isn't short stories. How is he going to stretch this out to the whole length, and how's this going to work? But it was actually really effective.
Well, you just got to hope when you're on that desert island that your northerner usage die doesn't run out, and you just end up with a Danish book, which is something I've never subjected you to.
Or a gore novel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, funnily enough, that's a tough choice, isn't it? Do you read a gore novel, which is passably well written but just gross, or do you read a Danish novel, which is terribly written and full of 47 typos per page and has 4.5
Are they self-published?
No, they were published by Manor, I think, a small American publisher. But yeah, absolutely shot through with errors and 4.5 page descriptions of sports that make no sense. And units of measurement like kimigs and migs.
Well, that was the other thing with Thongor, wasn't it? Even in that passage that you read out, you couldn't call something a buckler or a shield or a hat. It had to be like a dongler.
Yeah,
which of course is a dragon hide hat. And you're like, well,
so the Danish novels are like that on steroids.
Yeah,
with typos and sentences that don't make sense.
Yeah. But I get that that's a job of work somebody's doing towards world building, but in the end, most of the time it just gets in the way.
You know what? I say good luck to that guy because he wrote those books, he got them published, and you can still find them in secondhand shops to this very day. So, all power to him. But
No, I
fucking
haven't
hell,
published anything.
I wouldn't read another one.
I haven't published anything, but the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? John Jakes is the guy with who has no doubt made a healthy bequest to his offspring or other relatives.
Absolutely, John Jakes is the champ.
I mean, I'm half tempted, although I'd be a bit scared if there was any lost cause stuff. But I'm half tempted at some point to have a look at one of the northeast south things, or maybe those centenary things.
Yeah, epic Civil War fiction. Yeah, I don't know.
It depends how lost cause it goes. That would be the issue.
I suppose so. Yeah. I don't know. I never saw the TV series, so I ain't got a clue where it's coming from.
It was on in the house, but it didn't register to the same level of Winds of War. But I think Winds of War only registered because we had a copy of Winds of War, and for a war-obsessed kid, it had a table of all the ranks in the back of Winds of War. So that was great.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Clark, and we shall no doubt reconvene at some point to either talk about more barbarian novels or just something or other.
Well, I'll see you in October, hopefully.
Oh, I will, of course, see you in October, yes. For a very pleasant afternoon of gaming and an evening of birthday-related drinking.
Yes, indeed. But, something before then. You take care. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. See you soon.
I'll be interested to hear if any of your listeners have read any of these and what their impression was.
Yes, answers on a postcard, stroke.
Patreon, social media. Yeah. I don't know why I'm doing it in a vaguely French accent. But there you go.
I don't know. It was nice, though.
Slate. Don't know. I just feel a bit Gallic when we're getting towards 10 o'clock. Yeah. Right.
Massive thanks once again to Clarky for joining me to talk about some 60s Conan knockoffs. We may revisit this at some point. Perhaps folks out there have some recommendations for decent, or even spectacularly awful, Conan rip-offs. We could look at some of the films we briefly referred to as well, but there are so many podcasts out there talking about most of them, we probably won't. Besides, we will be talking about a film and novelisation soon with Joe Banks again, but it's not a greasy barbarian movie. Oh no, it's something quite different. It does, however, have a slim tangential link to one of our other recent podcasts with Andrew Netty, but more on that another time. And thanks as always to our patrons for keeping this show on the road. First, those without tier, Anthony Paconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster and Sebastian Weetabix. And to our chaos engineers, Ed Von Stout, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner-Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Nick Hopkinson, Ofer Ziv, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Scott Butler, and Simon Perrins. And of course thanks to our crafty Jugaderos, Alexander Harris, Christian Hundal, Graham Holden, Liam Turner, Loz, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Sean Twist, Toby White, and Taylor Lavery. And eternal thanks to our patron demons, Alistair Davison, Andy Clark, Andy Darby, David Lee, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Imria, Jenny Stim, Jason Vogel, Joe Monty, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Mark Hebden, Mary Slatauskas, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last, but never least, Robert McMillan. Okay, enough of my blather. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. BITAR Breakfast in the Ruins Radio is live on Radio Garden or via the web player at breakfastintheruinsradio.blogspot.com. What a mouthful that is. It's also available on some other radio apps. Check it out. We have our Patreon page too, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But for now, I'm off to watch my new Italian Blu-ray copy of Your Hunter from the Future. So, Take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.